Hello, world. Today, brother Kyle and myself are going to be making a reaction video to a piece of content that was recently published by Christian Watson. He is a right-leaning fellow and self-admittedly, which is nice actually. And the video that we're going to be talking about today is called "The Environmentalist Cult Must Be Stopped." Um, it's a pretty interesting video, kind of, I guess. But we'll get started, and that's Brother Kyle.
And Cody. So to show the video here, once again, it is the environmentalist cult must be stopped, exposing its origins by Christian Watson. And we are going to react to it as it goes. So without further ado, let's just get started.
Kyle, do you have your sound turned on? Is this like glitching out really bad for you, or? Okay.
We don't want them to die. That there are some people here who do care. So I want you to know that, trees.
The environmentalist cult must be stopped. But
yeah, so apparently he's just gonna start with like this inadvertent ad hominem where he refers to environmentalists as basically just like this group of crazies that he has to respond to. And essentially the very first argument that he makes is that because is that environmentalism is a cult, and in my opinion, that is a false premise.
Yeah, that gets into like the later part, kind of, I think, of what you're talking about or what you're going to talk about. But right away at the beginning of this video, I think is an example of cherry picking, and it shows specific examples of, like he called them, the crazies, but I would just say specific examples of extremism, which are very prevalent in America on both sides of the spectrum, which is really interesting because, like, those were very obviously left wing environmentalist extremists. But it's also easy to find examples of right wing extremism and just like plaster them into your videos. Um, but that honestly is, I wrote this down, that's part of America. And I think that's unfortunately one of the better parts of America is if you want to have extreme values, you can have extreme values and you can even have a platform to say them to a certain extent. So, yeah.
but the only way you or I can stop it is if we understand it. If we understand where it comes from, how it developed, and why precisely it is acting in the way it does. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you will have a better understanding of the ideological origins and roots of the environmentalist cult, which is running roughshod over the West right now, which has...
Yeah, so this video is not a clarification of environmentalism as he claims here. It simply is not. If anything, it's a convolution of
Agreed.
what is really going on in the environmentalist movement. But unfortunately, what he's talking about or he says that it's running roughshod over the West, and it's like he continually goes back to this concept where, like, I don't know if he has any research or like experience in Eastern philosophy, and like he constantly goes back to his obsession with Western philosophy, and it's like, dude, do you know anything about Eastern philosophy? And this is actually a conversation I want to have with him.
Yeah, and I think it is something that would have more value for you because, again, you know philosophy, and that's kind of the point that we're going to come to later on this video. Is like this isn't really an environmentalist video; it's more a philosophy video. So it's kind of weird that environmentalism's in the or environmentalist is in the title. But with that being said, your next timestamp is actually where I have another good note, I think. So you can go ahead and play if you want.
Bought out essentially nonprofit organizations, bought out politicians, has ran fear campaigns for decades upon decades upon decades, has tried to push legislation spurred by those fear campaigns to limit economic productivity, and all this and more has, in many cases, blocked public roadways in order to protest oil and protest the greenhouse gas crisis, so to speak, the climatological crisis. You will understand all of that and more by the end of this video. And even if you're not an expert, you will be able to better assess and deal with these ideas than people who merely scream at the wind and dismiss these foul actors are able to. Now, my friends, again, as I mentioned, environmentalism, we have to understand, environmentalism by itself is not a bad thing. In fact, environmentalism by itself is an impulse that I think all human beings should have. We live in a planet, we live in an environment that feeds us, and by consequence, we also feed it. It provides us with all the sustenance that we need for life. It provides us with all the necessities of life and everything like that. So, in my opinion, being an environmentalist instead of being a conservationist seems rather intuitive to me. But this modern day form of environmentalism that goes beyond mere stewardship, which means taking care of the land, or taking care of the land that you have in your possession, or taking care of the land around you, it goes beyond mere stewardship and goes towards something much more sinister and much more vile that takes the aesthetic of being a caretaker and uses it for its own ends. So let's ask ourselves, my friends, where did modern day environmentalism come from? Because, of course, the modern day environmentalist movement is pushing things like environmental social governance scores, which are essentially social credit scores that keep track of how well corporations are being ideologically indoctrinated by ideas that, according to these people, are settled by science, and if you challenge them, you're a reality denier. That's one vestige of this movement.
Yeah, so I will stop there because this is really just the beginning of his mischaracterization of the environmentalist movement, as he refers to it over and over, the modern environmentalist movement. And I'll start with the fact that ESG scores are not, quote, how well corporations are being ideologically indoctrinated by ideas that, according to these people, are settled by science. So yeah, you can just do a little bit of research on ESG scores and find out that they are not what he says they are. And this really just goes into the idea that ESG scores, the big reset, geoengineering, things like these that are like, relevant scientific topics are being written off by conspiracy theorists as like these big nefarious things that are happening.
So I have a note on this that I think you'll like. And so he says corporations are being ideologically indoctrinated. That's in part of the quote that you read. And so I'm not, and actually, I'll say this. He probably would go even a step further and say that it is a Marxist ideology that is being pushed in corporate America. And to me, it's like, So we have record corporate profits in our capitalist system that features companies that are being indoctrinated with Marxist ideology. It makes my head want to explode. It makes my head want to explode. Like, I just don't understand it.
Like the concept of a Marxist corporation. It's like, well, that doesn't.
Well, that's not a thing, right? Exactly. And so this is the other thing is I think you forgot to mention it in your last timestamp, and it happens throughout. And you were talking about the mischaracterization, but what he also does is gish gallop like crazy. I don't think you have mentioned it yet. It's in your notes, and I just thought it would be a good time for us to bring this up because we haven't yet. And dude, he is the king of gish gallop. So yeah.
Yeah, we're what, like 3 minutes in, and he's got like 20 different arguments.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
Other message of this movement is the push to eliminate gasoline cars and push everything towards over electric cars has been quite popular. In California, for example, there was a push to eliminate all gasoline-powered cars by 2050. And I can keep going on and on and on and on. This entire apparatus of political and social action fueled by this movement, and yet few people know where it comes from. And so I want to actually characterize the environmentalist movement by addressing a few of its foundational points. Because as I say on this channel all the time, my friends, it's not important. The argument itself, what the argument says, is not important.
Yeah. So, despite the effort that he puts forth here, I actually still consider his entire video one big mischaracterization. And
Right.
that's what he's going to do here. He's going to argue that like you shouldn't argue on a false premise, and that's
Right.
literally like his first false premise once again is that environmentalism is a cult or religion.
Right. And this is something that we something that we have privately talked about because it's like this video is about philosophy and religion, like it's not about environmentalism. With that being said, I would actually like to focus on a very small tidbit of one of the things that he mentioned, and that was transitioning away from gasoline cars to electric cars. And I won't even, I'm going to talk about this later, and it's going to come full circle, and I won't even claim that it's original thought because the idea that consumers and even the millions of Americans who commute every day using their gasoline cars are not nearly as responsible for what's happening to our environment. That's corporations, and I'll get into that as we get further into the video. Yeah. But gasoline cars is like, what? Like, I drive a Maserati and I'm not going to stop, and you drive an Infiniti. Like, I'm not going to stop driving a nice car because I want to and we live in America, but I would drive an electric version of my car if it was just as fast. This is my thing is like, if we want to talk about vehicles working off of electricity instead of gas, then we should be talking about freight, like trains and trucks and not commercial airlines, but like freight airlines and things like that. Yeah, like shipping. These are the big things that are causing emissions on a higher level than the millions of Americans driving to work every day.
Yeah, I saw a meme the other day where it was like these peaches are manufactured in Argentina, packaged in Singapore, and then sold in the United States. And it's like,
right.
Well, how the hell does that make sense? And yeah, and I'm supposed to worry about the emissions that my Maserati put out.
Right, exactly. Right.
What the argument assumes and presumes is important. Because if an argument presumes a false idea, and you can demonstrate that argument is based on a false idea, the argument itself falls apart automatically without you even addressing it. So let me give you an example. If I say Todd is at the park today with his son.
Yeah, and so to be facetious, this literal video is an entire example of what he's trying to say.
son. Well, the argument itself is saying, well, Todd is with the son at the park. And no one would really think that's anything wrong with that on its face. But that argument has several presumptions. Number one, Todd has a son. Number two, Todd has the means to get to a park. Number three, a park actually exists for Todd to go to. And I can go on and on and on. I don't want to bore you with the linguistics. But if one of those assumptions are untrue, that argument falls apart. So let's say that Todd does not have a son. That argument makes no sense. Same thing with any other concept, any other ideology, any other movement, any other philosophy that exists in the world, including that of modern day environmentalism.
So his false idea, as he said, is that, environmentalism is a cult, which to me just seems ridiculous because it's not. And therefore, according to Christian's own logic, his argument falls apart because it's based on the false premise that environmentalism is a cult. And that's literally the entire argument of everything he's going to say is that environmentalism is a cult, and that's a false premise.
I define modern day environmentalism by the following principles. Number one, the man-nature relationship. And by the way, I'm going to explain all these principles to you as the video goes on. Number two, the concept of no growth. Number three, the town-country distinction. Number four, social progress over material progress. Number five, primitivism. These are the 5 defining characteristics from my own research that I have found undergird the modern day environmentalist movement. I would encourage you to write all of those down because I'm going to fill in the blanks for you as this video goes on. And I'll just say this before I continue. It's not enough to dismiss the climate activists and the environmentalists with statistics, data, all that kind of stuff. Data comes after you have constructed a sound argument. So many people, especially so many of us on the right, rush towards data, rush towards coarse-grained charts, and we sacrifice ourselves upon the altar of these numbers as opposed to understanding that the antecedent, what comes before the numbers are valid, are ideas meant to guide them. A statistic existing out there in the ether means nothing, but a statistic informed by a sound worldview can open up the door to broader meaning, higher meaning, and it can help you pursue the truth. I want all of you to have that fruitful view of statistics and to use them correctly. I'm begging you because this is an existential threat to our understanding, this over-reliance on statistics. And also,
take this one?
Go ahead.
Can I start and then you go? Is that okay?
Please do.
Oh my God. All right. So he says the right cares about data. Not only that, the right rushes towards data. Okay. So this specific subject is one where it's like, so the data is really what they're looking at, and the conclusions that they're making about environmental changes are based on statistical data. Dude, that's what climate change is like it's higher temperatures, rising sea levels, the snow caps melting, all of these things are quantifiable science. That's a number. The rising sea level is a number. The hotter temperatures in your, and that's the thing too, is it was 90 degrees today and I live in Pittsburgh and it's September.
Yeah, it's Pittsburgh in September. So this is actually great because what he's doing here is he's trying to justify anti-intellectualism.
Right.
And ultimately, in a roundabout way, he's saying that philosophy matters more than science.
Yep.
And I'm going to revert back to a point that I wanted to make earlier when he was talking about principles, because he has an obsession with the concept of first principles and just principles in general. And this points to his like obsession or like the inclination to towards the philosophical. Yeah, and unfortunately, when you do that, you negate anomalous information that is absolutely vital. Like, if you think everything boils down to philosophy, then you're going to miss a lot.
So something also that is going to happen is Christian's going to express his feelings about nature and things like that, and I think that plays directly into the what you said about him thinking philosophy is more important than science. Christian doesn't seem to have a very favorable view of nature, especially in comparison to other humans. Um, And with that being said, you could understand why you would think philosophy, you're this guy. And that's the other thing is like philosophy isn't something that can be applied to animals or like that. There's that argument, right? But you can apply it. So yeah, it really is interesting because I think you're right. I think he does think philosophy is more important than science, and maybe it's not a binary thing. Maybe he thinks that they can be equally important, but I just don't see that with what you and I have seen from him. It seems like he thinks philosophy is more important than science, and I definitely disagree with that. Obviously, I think science is like the most important thing. So
Yeah, to be fair, we should probably all care about science and probably trust it. Like, you gotta be like a conspiracy theorist to not trust science, right?
right, exactly, and that's the thing is that, and that's where it's getting further too. And the reason I don't like it, and I am very open minded, and I try to understand where the other side of the political, or try to understand why the other side of the political spectrum ends up where they end up. Um, but like when you're gonna do things like that, like denying science, and like, man, I had a girl in my class earlier this year or last year, and she was like a straight up flat earther, and like yeah, and I don't even engage on that one. I'm like, if you think that, then I don't want to talk to you about that
Where do
subject.
you start?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So in part two, we will pick up on where or on what Christian thinks about the modern environmentalist movement. So finish us up on part two or part
Yeah,
one.
right. And so basically, actually, where it kind of goes into, and this is something that our notes kind of coalesce on, is that he describes the environmentalist movement as currently being two factions, one of two factions, and so that's kind of where we'll pick up on part two. And so, people, as you always know, remember knowledge is power.